Ichiju Makoto was an ordinary office worker who found himself working overtime as usual, and just as he was barely catching the last train home, he was suddenly attacked. He couldn't understand why this was happening to him, as he had worked, done overtime, and taken the train just like any other day. Lying injured in a park, he realized he had been mugged, a victim of what's known as oyajigari, and as if his situation wasn't dire enough, it began to snow while he weakly called for help. Makoto reflected on his difficult life, burdened by his father's debts which he spent years working hard to repay, finally clearing them when he was 28. He had endured the employment ice age, power harassment, and unpaid overtime, and even after becoming free from debt, he never managed to find a girlfriend and was now 38, desperately clinging to life and not wanting to die. As he lay there pleading for someone to help him, a horrible bitter taste suddenly spread throughout his mouth. He vaguely wondered if it was hair tonic, but a voice informed him it was a potion. When Makoto came to, he found himself looking at a young girl dressed like a witch, and his first dazed thought was to ask if it was Halloween. The girl, however, told him to get up because his injuries were healed, and he soon learned he was in a place she called a dungeon. She explained that this was reality and suggested he might have been summoned directly if he didn't understand what was going on. This girl, Sato Yuka, mentioned she found him covered in blood and initially thought he was one of them. A still confused Makoto introduced himself as Ichiju Makoto. He tried to explain his situation, recounting how he was attacked in the park after work, but Yuka seemed unfazed. Feeling disrespected, Makoto insisted he was 38 and that she should show some respect for her elders. To prove his age, he showed her his driver's license, but Yuka dismissed it, thinking it belonged to his father. It was then Makoto noticed his clothes felt baggy and his shoes didn't fit, prompting him to ask for a mirror. Yuka reluctantly handed him one, mentioning her mother had given it to her. Looking at his reflection, Makoto was shocked to see he had become significantly younger. As he tried to process this, Makoto attempted to light a cigarette but started coughing, wondering if his newfound youth had also cleaned his lungs. Yuka, annoyed by his smoking, reminded him that she had used a precious potion on him and that he should be more polite, implying she was now older than him in this new context. She urged him that they needed to get out of the dungeon. After they had been walking for about an hour, Makoto, finally addressing her properly as Sato Yuka, asked her how she ended up there. She explained that about a month prior, her entire classroom suddenly went white, and she, along with roughly 20 of her classmates, was teleported to another world, specifically to a place called Valis Kingdom. There, the king informed them they had been summoned by the envoys of the gods. Yuka continued her story, stating they were told that if they defeated the immortal king, they might be able to return home, which led to everyone joining the knights. However, the king didn't seem to provide much support for them. During their endeavors, Yuka got separated from her group, lost her map, ran out of food, and eventually used her only remaining potion to heal Makoto. She then revealed that she saved him because, as a mage, she needed a tank or a fighter to protect her. Makoto, whose character sheet displayed him as a level 1 spiritualist with a subclass of martial artist, was dismayed by his low stats, particularly his HP of 12 and strength of 9. Yuka knew his stats because of her appraisal skill and even mentioned his rare soul dash skill, which surprised him. Their conversation quickly devolved into bickering when he felt she was nitpicking his words. Their argument was cut short by the appearance of a large zombie, causing both Makoto and Yuka to scream in terror. Regaining his composure, Makoto told Yuka to prepare for battle, and she began chanting a spell, invoking Lion Kesta Agata and Perioris, culminating in the word manifest, as she launched a magical attack. Makoto was initially amazed by the display of magic, but the zombie, though hit, continued to advance. Yuka urged Makoto to draw its attention for one more shot, but his legs gave out from fear or weakness, and he found himself screaming for her to use more magic. The zombie then grabbed Makoto, who struggled and yelled for it to let him go, while Yuka desperately tried to chant another spell. Overwhelmed, Makoto berated himself for relying on Yuka, who was just a high school girl, feeling a familiar sense of unfairness wash over him. As the zombie bore down on him, he cried out, questioning why he always ended up in such terrible situations. Memories of his miserable past life flashed before his eyes, and he screamed that he didn't want to die, not even in this new world. Suddenly, a powerful force erupted from Makoto, striking the zombie and causing it to disintegrate, much to Yuka's surprise, who thought he was not bad at all. Makoto, realizing he could control this new power which he identified as spirit magic, commanded the remnants of the zombie to disappear before checking if Yuka was alright. Makoto apologized for not being much help during the fight. Yuka, adjusting her hat, reassured him that his injuries would probably heal soon and asked if this had been his first real battle. He admitted it wasn't, just as a voice only he could hear announced, "Level up," and that he had received 1 bonus point. His stats improved to level 2, with HP 13, Strength 10, Agility 12, and Magic 18. Simultaneously, the bite marks on his body healed, and the pain vanished. Yuka explained that only he could hear the envoy's voice. Makoto found the system remarkably game-like. Yuka, who was level 5, mentioned that they could spend points to acquire skills by visiting a church. Rummaging through the zombie's dropped backpack, Makoto found a pair of boots that fit him perfectly, a welcome find since his old shoes were now too large for his younger body. Yuka also informed him that the night squad they were supposed to be part of was divided into combat and support teams. Later, Makoto questioned Yuka about his earlier outburst where he commanded the zombie to disappear, leading to another round of bickering when she called him useless. He retorted that she'd be cute if she wasn't so short-tempered, but she dismissed his comment. Eventually, Makoto suggested they should focus on escaping the dungeon while minimizing combat. When he asked how they could determine their current location, Yuka stated they were on the 10th basement floor and that the dungeon structure, currently resembling a cave, changed depending on the floor. Hearing they were so deep underground, Makoto sighed, "This is gonna be tough." Yuka groaned at his choice of words, finding it embarrassing and accusing him of acting like a light novel protagonist or a chuyuni. Makoto, bewildered, insisted it was a perfectly normal phrase, wondering if he was experiencing a generation gap. Takuya Kimura desperately fleeing through a dark, cavernous area, his breath coming in heavy pants as he realizes his pursuers are rapidly closing in on him, leaving him with no alternative but to turn and confront them. As 2 large, monstrous figures approach, Takuya questions how events led to this dire situation and, with a shout of frustration, introduces himself as Takuya Kimura, warning the creatures to stay back. Despite his defiance, Takuya is struck by one of the monsters, crying out in pain while a flashback reveals the moment his entire class was summoned to this new world, an event that had initially filled him with excitement, making him feel like the protagonist of a fantastical tale. Back in the present struggle, he continues to fend off the creature. Heavily injured and bleeding from his face, Takuya laments that zombies, which he believed were weak, are proving to be incredibly strong, and he wonders about the whereabouts of everyone else. He reflects on his unfulfilled potential, noting that he never had a chance to shine and the role assigned to him was insignificant, all while enduring the ongoing assault. Another flashback shows Takuya alongside Cookie, a prominent figure in their class, and other classmates. Cookie had expressed reliance on Takuya, proposing they defeat the undead king together and return to their world, a sentiment that had brought Takuya happiness. However, the harsh reality of this new world, far from being a game or a light novel, becomes starkly apparent as he faces 3 menacing, shadowy figures. Overcome with terror, Takuya is attacked again, a creature biting his shoulder, and he questions his prior ability to fight without fear, wondering if it stemmed from an unquestioning knightly resolve. In profound agony and despair, he then questions his faith in Cookie, someone he barely knew before their arrival in this world, just before being overwhelmed by the monstrous assailants. The narrative then shifts to the present, focusing on an ex-middle-aged man, now in a younger body and appearing in a suit, accompanied by a high school girl named Yuka, who is dressed like a witch. They are presented as an unlikely pair trying to escape a dungeon. Yuka initiates an attack by chanting a spell, Ryunokesta Agata, Unending Barrioris, which materializes as a magic bullet aimed at approaching zombies. Her companion, the man, simultaneously unleashes his own magic, Ignite, causing black flames to erupt from his hand. The man's fire attack strikes a zombie, but he observes that its effect is still unstable. Seeing this, Yuka decides she must act and casts Magic Bullet. Manifest, once more, this time with a seemingly more potent visual effect. Her magic bullet hits its target, and she briefly wonders if she has succeeded, but the damaged zombie remains standing. Meanwhile, the man is engaged in combat with another zombie, and with a determined cry of, "Die!" he delivers a devastating kick to its head, completely destroying it. After the battle, Yuka remarks that their actions feel like robbery, to which the man responds that it's time to collect loot. A system notification announces a level up for him, detailing his new stats and bonus points. As he gathers items from a chest, he concedes that it indeed resembles robbery, retracting his earlier thought. Yuka expresses her disappointment with the meager haul, wishing for better weapons to ease their struggles. Her companion, feeling exhausted, suggests they retreat to an open area to rest for the day. Yuka then sets up a protective barrier by placing 4 special needles at 4 corners. The man, having just established the barrier, tells her she can at least lay out a blanket. As they settle down, he sighs about their 3 days of aimless wandering, and Yuka voices her growing fear that they might never find a way out. The man notices Yuka sniffing the air and asks what is wrong. She complains about wanting a bath or at least a shower. He gestures to a water flask, a magical item capable of producing unlimited water, and suggests she could wipe herself down. Yuka adamantly refuses to do so in his presence, worried he might peek, a notion he quickly denies. She also laments the lack of a map and the absence of basic supplies like paper and pencils. A moment later, Yuka is startled when her companion mentions he can see her, implying he saw her underwear due to the way she was sitting. He clarifies it was unintentional, but she calls him a pervert and throws something at him. Flustered, Yuka abruptly informs him that she already has someone she likes, a person named Cookie, whom she describes as rich, handsome, smart, athletic, and possessing a great personality, emphasizing that Cookie is on an entirely different level compared to him. Her companion simply acknowledges her statement, and Yuka adds that money is important, a detail he finds unusual in her description of a love interest. He then asks if her sudden declaration means she is warning him not to make any advances, finding her timing rather odd. Yuka confirms his interpretation. He comments on how impressive it was that Cookie had organized their classmates after they were transported to this new world, and Yuka agrees. Her companion then states that he wouldn't do anything to create an enemy in their current precarious situation. Annoyed, Yuka tells him to eat something and go to sleep, once again throwing an object at him, prompting him to ask her to stop. Later, the man seems contemplative, murmuring about wanting a warm meal because their current provisions are dry and tasteless, before dismissing it as just a keyword to hype himself up. Yuka, overhearing him, asks about the Ignite incantation he used earlier. He explains it's a personal keyword. She criticizes him for acting like a chunibu even after 3 days in the dungeon. He apologizes, but she warns him that such dramatic displays, even with a barrier up, could attract unwanted attention. Touching a glowing mark on his hand, the man expresses that being a spirit sorcerer feels somewhat underwhelming. Yuka disagrees, pointing out that his fire magic is unstable and lacks long-range capability. When he asks if she thinks he's using it correctly, she admits she was too preoccupied with her own challenges to observe. He then wonders aloud if she has any advice on how to use his abilities better. Yuka suggests that since his secondary job is a martial artist, he should simply resort to punching their enemies, an idea he quickly rejects, stating it's because it's frightening. Yuka calls his fear pathetic for a man. He responds that, in contrast, Yuka is amazing for her bravery. He explains his desire to maintain a safety margin because, unlike a game, their current reality offers no saves or continues. Yuka dismisses his compliments, saying they won't achieve anything. He then shares his honest opinion that they are in a genuine fight to the death, acknowledging that while their initial experiences were rough, Yuka's ability to avoid freezing up in fear is impressive. This revelation shocks Yuka, who hadn't realized the true stakes of their battles. Upset, Yuka exclaims that his perception is wrong and that she cannot entrust her life to someone who seems to have lost their grip on reality, urging him to understand the difference between a game and their current situation. She confesses she was unaware they were fighting for their lives and, while not fully understanding it, had never found their circumstances strange. Her companion, perplexed by her reaction, decides there's no point dwelling on it and states that their immediate focus should be on escaping the dungeon, for which they need to rest. The following day, the man checks on Yuka, asking if she is okay. When she inquires what he means, he explains his concern that she might freeze up in combat now that she understands they are in a life-or-death struggle. Yuka believes she will be fine. He reiterates that their primary goal is to stay alive, meaning reckless, all-out attacks are not an option. Yuka then comments that his attitude is terrible, and when he asks for specifics, she concedes that perhaps she is the weird one and that it's just her nature, feeling foolish for even asking. Suddenly, her companion interrupts, telling her to wait as he smells blood, and urges her to move carefully. Alarmed, Yuka asks what is happening. Kimura became aware of an unusual smell that was more than just blood, while Makoto observed with a focused gaze. They found themselves in a desolate, snow-covered area. The scene then shifted to a horrifying moment where a girl, whom Kimura identified as Yuka, was being viciously mauled by a zombie-like creature. As Kimura engaged another monstrous figure, Makoto called out his name, Kimura-ku, with evident concern. Kimura, determined, announced his intention for a preemptive strike. While Kimura battled the creature, Makoto, from a short distance, began to chant a spell, invoking stones to become projectiles to pierce her enemies. She shouted to get Kimura's attention before finally manifesting a magic bullet. However, her first spell narrowly missed its intended target, flying past Kimura and exploding nearby, which startled him. The creature Kimura was fighting remained standing. Undeterred, Makoto continued her incantation as the creature lunged at Kimura. He skillfully dodged and countered with a cry of "Ignite!" striking the monster. The creature shrieked from Kimura's blow. Focused on dispatching it quickly before any other threats emerged, Kimura lunged again for a decisive attack. He struck the creature repeatedly, but it stubbornly refused to fall, causing Kimura to curse its resilience. The creature, with its gruesome face, seemed to convey a profound hatred for the living, a sentiment Kimura acknowledged he could understand. With a powerful punch that appeared to tear straight through the monster, Kimura expressed his shared understanding of its feelings, seemingly destroying it. Immediately after, Makoto launched another magic bullet, which detonated dangerously close to Kimura, making him exclaim in surprise. Kimura, somewhat annoyed, asked Makoto if she was already all right and requested that she give him a heads-up next time. Makoto confidently retorted, asking who he thought she was and stating she had made sure not to hit him. Kimura chuckled, referring to her as just a foul-mouthed high school girl. Their attention then turned to the other creature, the one that had attacked Yuka, which was surprisingly still moving. Kimura affirmed that they needed to take care of it. Suddenly, this remaining creature began a grotesque transformation, emitting strange sounds. Kimura wondered aloud what was happening, while Makoto nervously admitted she didn't know. The creature let out a terrifying roar as its metamorphosis completed, revealing it had evolved into a more formidable ghoul. Kimura exclaimed that it had evolved and that no one had informed him about such a possibility, noting the zombie had reached its level cap. Makoto, however, entered a state of intense concentration, once again chanting her spell to create a piercing projectile, and Kimura observed her complete focus. With unwavering concentration, Makoto unleashed her magic bullet. Kimura, watching her, commented on how truly amazing she was as the spell struck the ghoul directly. Both Kimura and Makoto briefly believed they had succeeded, but as the smoke cleared, the ghoul emerged, roaring defiantly and seemingly unharmed, leaving Kimura in shock. The ghoul charged, and Kimura yelled for Makoto to cover him as he rushed forward to confront the beast, managing to dodge its initial onslaught. However, the ghoul's long hair or tendrils ensnared Kimura, and he was violently slammed into the ground. Seeing Kimura in grave danger, Makoto quickly prepared another magic bullet. As the ghoul continued its assault on the downed Kimura, he cried out, "Yuka!" perhaps in his distress or as a memory of the other victim, just before Makoto launched her attack. Despite being under attack, Kimura managed to seize the ghoul's head, determined to end the fight, and landed a strong blow. His attack connected, and he questioned if that would be enough, but the ghoul swiftly retaliated, throwing him to the ground once more, causing Kimura to curse in frustration. The ghoul then smashed Kimura into the ground again. Battered, Kimura realized this creature was on a completely different level than ordinary zombies, possessing combat intelligence that made him question the extent of its evolution. With the ghoul pinning him down and about to deliver a fatal bite, Kimura struggled. Makoto, seeing Kimura in extreme peril, softly called his given name, Makoto, as if to focus herself or in deep concern, and began a new incantation, calling upon raging flames. Levitating slightly, Makoto then unleashed a powerful flame bullet, commanding it to incinerate her enemy. The fiery projectile engulfed the ghoul that was on top of Kimura. The ghoul shrieked in agony as it was consumed by the flames, its form disintegrating while Kimura managed to pull himself free. Makoto watched with concern as the ghoul's burning remains fell apart. Kimura stood up, but Makoto suddenly cried out his given name, Makoto, in alarm. Kimura looked down to see his left arm was horribly injured, possibly severed or burned away, leaving him staring at his grievous wound in shock. Makoto stood heavily injured, his arm mangled and bloodied, while Yuka urgently shouted his name, telling him they needed to run. However, Makoto, wheezing from his injuries, questioned where they could possibly flee, as the terrifying angel-like monster loomed before them. Yuka wondered if he was about to make a noble sacrifice, but Makoto dismissed the idea, stating that such an action would lead to both their deaths. She then questioned if his previous attack was his full power or if he had suddenly awakened a new ability in their dire situation, and Makoto confirmed that they had no option left but to go all out against their foe. With a grim chuckle, Makoto remarked that he wasn't some typical shonen manga protagonist who would miraculously power up, and Yuka acknowledged this, dryly noting his age. As he spoke, Makoto observed his injured hand, which began to emanate a dark, ominous energy. He contemplated his next move while his hand became further enveloped in this strange power. Nearby, the angel-like monster also seemed to be recovering, and Yuka noted that its flames were unstable, realizing she had to act quickly or face defeat. Makoto then instructed Yuka to attack the monster with the same flame ability she had used before. Yuka expressed doubt, suggesting her previous hit only landed due to the element of surprise, but Makoto urged her to simply get the attack close enough. Reluctantly, Yuka complied and began to chant a powerful incantation, calling upon ancient words to fuel her magic. She unleashed a tremendous torrent of fire, commanding it to burn their enemy to ashes as the spell manifested with explosive force. The monster roared in response to the searing attack, while Makoto watched intently. As Yuka's flames engulfed the creature, Makoto wondered if its reaction was due to a fear of her fire or because its back had been burned in their earlier confrontation. The monster recoiled from the intense heat, and at that moment, Makoto experienced a revelation concerning the dark power now coalescing around his own fist. He declared that he finally understood what had been missing, referring to the wavering nature of his own power. He realized that these jet-black flames needed to be focused and gathered around his fist, and more importantly, he understood that the critical element he lacked was the true realization that their perilous situation was entirely real. Reflecting on his past hesitation, Makoto admitted that even when the monster seemed to be dying, he couldn't fully grasp the reality of the danger, lacking the resolve to truly confront his fear. With newfound determination, he lunged towards the creature, shouting for it to collapse as he prepared to deliver a decisive blow. His fist, empowered by the dark flames, struck the monster with immense force, creating a significant impact that signaled the end of the battle. In the aftermath, the monster lay defeated. Yuka, visibly shocked by their victory, asked if they had truly done it, while an exhausted Makoto looked on. Soon after, Makoto collapsed from his exertion, complaining of extreme tiredness. A notification appeared, informing him that he had leveled up to 10, receiving bonus points and increases to his stamina, strength, agility, and magic. Yuka approached him, and he acknowledged that their success was thanks to her efforts. Concerned, Yuka asked if he was all right. Makoto replied that his body felt sluggish and noted with some disgust that while his wounds had healed due to the level up, the profound fatigue remained, and the healing process itself looked quite grotesque. Seeing his lingering discomfort, Yuka decided there was no other way and prepared to use her magic. Makoto was surprised to learn she could use healing magic, a fact Yuka casually confirmed. She then channeled her power, and without any incantation, a healing light enveloped Makoto's arm. He thanked her, feeling somewhat better, and curiously asked if her instant healing was a skill since she hadn't chanted. Yuka then steered the conversation, telling him not to lie about his earlier hesitation when he faced the first zombie. She questioned his reluctance, and Makoto explained that the zombie had been someone he knew, a former classmate he had never even spoken to. Yuka pressed if that was the only reason, and Makoto affirmed it was. Makoto then brought up that Koki guy, asking about his fate. He mentioned that despite assurances from others, including someone named Hoshino-san, that it was safe, something had clearly gone wrong. Yuka, looking somberly at a nearby corpse, identified the deceased as Hoshino Kirara-san, who had been the class vice president and a leader among the girls. She then asked Makoto who Koki was. Makoto deflected the question with a slight chuckle, saying it was nothing and that he was merely thinking how difficult being a student seemed to be. As he walked away, Yuka watched him, then turned her gaze to Hoshino's body, murmuring about them killing each other. She concluded with a resolved thought that she, too, needed to make up her mind about something important. Yuka and his companion, a witch, were exploring a cave when skeletons suddenly appeared. Yuka unleashed a powerful fire spell called Ignition, which incinerated the attacking undead, while the witch supported him by casting Magic Bullet to dispatch more skeletons. After the encounter, Yuka noted that things were becoming easier now that he had surpassed level 10, and he subsequently leveled up to 11, gaining a bonus point and improved stats in HP, strength, agility, and magic power. The witch checked if he was alright, and Yuka confirmed he was fine, mentioning that although they would normally rest, they needed to continue their exploration due to their dwindling food supply, which was down to about 4 days' worth even with careful rationing. As they pressed on, they suddenly heard a noise and saw a person being pursued by a large group of skeletons. The witch asked Yuka if he knew the individual, but Yuka didn't recognize them, yet he insisted they needed to help quickly. He prepared a new original fire spell he called Pitch Black, and both he and the witch launched their attack simultaneously, with the witch casting her fire bullet. Their combined magic created a significant explosion that wiped out the pursuing skeletons. They approached the person they had just saved, who was astounded by their powerful display. Yuka asked if the person was okay, and the individual, who introduced themselves as Tom, expressed immense gratitude for the rescue, remarking on how strong Yuka and the witch were. Yuka observed that Tom could understand Japanese, which Tom explained was one of the few gifts received from beings called messengers. Tom then suggested they move to a safer location to talk, and subsequently created a magical barrier that would prevent undead from detecting them. Inside the barrier, Tom confessed to being terrified, believing they were about to die. Yuka acknowledged their dire situation, and Tom mentioned having their own reasons for being in such a predicament. The witch then bluntly asked Tom if they knew a way to escape the dungeon. Tom confirmed they did, explaining that they explored dungeons for a living to support their little brother. Tom also shared some insights into dungeon exploration, revealing that knights typically send low-ranking individuals to scout ahead, often separating combat and support teams, and that people like Tom make and sell maps. Yuka realized they might have been set up as inexperienced adventurers, a common rookie-crushing tactic where newcomers are sent into dungeons without full disclosure of the dangers, a practice Tom said even knights employed. Tom advised them to be less trusting, stating that if they were fooled, it was their own fault, which shocked Yuka with the knight's ruthlessness. Yuka agreed that those who deceive others are the ones in the wrong. He then asked Tom if they could trade for a map and some food, also requesting a knife. Tom found their straightforward demands amusing but agreed, especially since they had saved Tom's life, and noted that Yuka and the witch didn't seem like bad people. However, Tom had one condition for providing the map and food: they had to promise to burn the map once they successfully escaped the dungeon. Yuka readily agreed. Tom was pleased that Yuka didn't immediately check the map's contents, calling him a good person, while Yuka expressed his trust that Tom wouldn't deceive those who had saved their life. Tom then showed them their current location on the map, pointing out a vertical shaft that led upwards. Tom warned them to be extremely careful as there was a massive, deep hole nearby, and falling into it would be fatal. Tom also emphasized that the Skeleton King's dungeon was incredibly vast, making their encounter a fortunate miracle. Yuka remarked that Tom hadn't seemed to be managing well earlier when they were being chased, but Tom insisted they could manage by continuously running if necessary. Yuka then questioned the feasibility of solo exploration if one couldn't rely on others, to which Tom admitted they usually managed. As Tom prepared to depart, Yuka thanked them for the map, food, and the knife. Before Tom left, Yuka held their hand and commented on how soft Tom's hands were for someone in their line of work. Flustered, Tom quickly said they had to go and ran off, but not before shouting back that if Yuka escaped the dungeon and went exploring again, they should hire Tom. Afterwards, Yuka asked the witch for her opinion. The witch noted that Tom's job was listed as thief, but their status was marked in blue, leading her to believe they could trust Tom. Yuka inquired about the blue status, and the witch explained that if someone kills another person outside of a declared war, their status turns red. Understanding this, Yuka asked what their next move was. The witch confidently stated that they would obviously move forward, now equipped with a map and food.